Hi, this is Mavel Japolit, BSIT 2A. In this video, I'm going to discuss the Chapter 13 Planning and Cabling Networks. So in my introduction, there are many considerations to make when planning the network. So in this section, we will consider the LAN connection and WAN. The choice of which router to deploy is determined by the Ethernet interfaces that match the technology of the switches at the center of the LAN. So the inter-network devices that we will be using in the course will be primarily routers and switches. So making the physical connection, choosing the appropriate LAN device. For this course, the choice of which router to deploy is to determine by the Ethernet interfaces that match the technology of the switches at the center of the LAN. It is important to note that the router's other many services and features to the LAN. These services and features are covered in the more advanced courses. Each LAN will have router as each gateway connecting the LAN to other networks. So inside the LAN will be one or more hubs or switches to connect the end device to the LAN. So inter-network devices. So first is the router. The routers are the primary device used to interconnect the various LAN networks. So each LAN is usually connected to others using an interface on the router. So the router has a various LANs interface that is connected to this segment. So therefore, when choosing a router, you should consider the numbers of LANs in your global network. So the router should also have interfaces that connect to outside interfaces such as an ISP. So in the intra-networks device, to create a LAN, we need to select the appropriate devices to connect the end device to the network. So the two most common devices used are hubs and switches. So hub receives signals, regenerates it and send the signal over all ports. So then the use of hubs creates a logical bus. This means that the LAN uses multi-access media. So the ports use the shared bandwidth approach and often have reduced performance in the LAN due to the collision and recovery. Although multiple hubs can be interconnected, they remain a single collision domain. So hubs are less expensive than switches. A hub is typically chosen as an intermediary device within a very small LAN. In a LAN that requires low throughput requirements or when finances are limited. So the switch will be used to connect to the various end users' device in our network. This may be PC, notebooks, IP phones, among others. So the switch is connected to the router using one of its interfaces so that other networks can be reached through the router. So device selections factors. In other network, there are several factors that will affect which devices we will install. So these factors may affect network performance and may be influenced by the factors. So the length of the cable is one of the most important factors to consider. The most network we will use the UTP or Unshelled Twisted Pair cable. So this cable is made of copper. The range should be limited to 100 meters. So, and telecommunication room in many organizations, this is the central area where intermediary devices such as routers, backbone switches, among others, are located. The cabling in this room should be correctly leveled as to avoid micro configuration and other problems. Backbone cables are the cables used to connect to devices such as servers, distribution cables connect to the user devices are in mainly straight through UTP cables. So cost, the various models of Cisco routers and switches, the choice of router or switch may be influenced by the budget that the organization may have. So the speed of the ports on a device may influence the decision to install a particular device. We will learn about the various speed and how they influence the network performance in upcoming chapters. So other factors that may influence our choice of device are the manageability of device, support, durability, whether it has expansion base, among others. Whatever device is chosen for your network, however, the successful implementation of the network will depend on the configuration and careful planning that has been done. So in developing an IP addressing scheme, when developing an addressing scheme for a network, the first task is to determine the number of hosts or end user devices in the network. So this may include the IP phones, servers, or user PCs, among others. So we also need to consider the number of inter-networking devices and interfaces on those devices that may need IP addresses. So these may include the router LAN interfaces, WAN interfaces, firewalls, among others. So third consideration we need to make for the devices in our network that may need management is the IP address. These IP addresses are the means to connecting devices that we need to configure, such as switches and wireless access points. So for these devices, we need to list all the categories of devices and determine the number of IP addresses that are needed. We also need to account for future growth of the network. So device interconnections, device interfaces, it is important to understand that Cisco devices, routers, and switches have several types of interfaces such as associated with them. You have to work with these interfaces in the lab. So these interfaces, also commonly called ports, are where cables are connected to the device. So, and LAN interfaces, the Ethernet interface is used for connecting cables that terminate with LAN devices such as computers and switches. This interface can also be used to connect routers to each other. This will be covered in more details in future courses. So several conventions for naming Ethernet interfaces are popular. So including the AUI or older Cisco device using a transceiver, Ethernet, fast Ethernet, and the fast Ethernet 0/0. The name used depends on the type and model of the device. So WAN interface or the serial WAN interface are used for connecting WAN devices to the CSU or DSU. CSU, DSU device used to make the physical connection between data networks and WAN provides circuits. So serial interfaces between routers will also use in our labs as part of various courses. For lab purposes, we will make a back-to-back connection between two routers using serial cables and set a clock rate on one of the interfaces. You may also need to configure other data link and physical layer parameters on a router. To establishing communication with the router via console on the remote WAN, a WAN interface is assigned layer 3 address IPv4 address. So in console interface, the console interface is the primary interface for initial configuration of the Cisco router or switch. It's also an important means of troubleshooting. It is important to note that with physical access to the router's console, Unauthorized person can interrupt or compromise network traffic. Physical security of network device is extremely important. So today, it is more important to know in planning and cabling networks. So, for example, the network and the data system need to act fast while still providing the original transaction and the process. Fiber optic and copper infrastructure cabling is so therefore the solution it allows you to add more capacity and redeploy access much easier than standard point-to-point cabling infrastructure. So with better flexibility, adaptability, and long-term productivity, this system is highly important if you want to grow your business. Not just that, but your data center needs an upgrade and reliable solution to stay relevant in the changing technological environment. So with the help of a structured cabling system, you can further disaster-proof your system networks and data of any system. So that's all for this activity for this chapter 10, planning and cabling networks. So thank you for listening or watching, and I hope you learned something from this video. And thank you.